All right, just look at this thing. It's got hands. I kind of love that. Well, hey there, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave from Chase the Summit, and this is the brand new Garmin Instinct Crossover. This is a pretty interesting watch. So the Garmin Instinct Crossover is built to be a rugged outdoor hiking kind of watch. It is, however, very similar to the older Garmin Instinct 2 that came out a while ago. These two watches have a lot in common, and because of that, this is going to be a different kind of video. In most of my videos, I do really in-depth reviews and go through every little setting of the watch, but I think that would bore you in this video about the Instinct Crossover because it's so similar to the Instinct 2. Instead, in this video, I'm gonna focus in on what's new and exciting about this watch and why it might be worth the extra high price tag as compared to the Garmin Instinct 2. Before we get to all that good stuff though, I do wanna remind you that if you find this video fun or entertaining or helpful, please consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel down below because that really helps me out. And if you're planning on picking up an Instinct Crossover or Instinct 2 or even the Garmin Fenix 7 or any watch I show in this video, check out the links in the description down below because those do help support this channel and they cost nothing extra to you, so you might as well use them. The first topic I want to tackle with the Instinct Crossover is going to be pricing and options. There are three main flavors of this watch. There's the base model that comes in at $499. There's the Instinct Crossover Solar model that comes with a solar panel on the front of the watch. That comes in at $549. And then there's the most expensive Instinct Crossover Solar Tactical, which is a very long name. That comes in at $599. That comes with a few extra features that are made for tactical purposes like stealth mode, and that is the most expensive option. And on top of the three main flavors, there's also a few different options in colors they can choose from when you're picking up this watch. In terms of pricing, the Garmin Instinct Crossover is a pretty expensive watch, especially when we go back in time and compare it to something like the original Garmin Instinct when that came out. That was more of an entry-level watch. It was more of a budget option, where this watch is definitely not a budget option. And if we compare it to something like the Garmin Instinct 2, it's about $100 more for the Instinct Crossover, and these two watches are very similar in terms of features and specs. Okay, now that we've talked about options and pricing with the new Instinct Crossover, I want to briefly go over what's the same between the Instinct Crossover and the older Instinct 2. Both the Instinct Crossover and Instinct 2 have the same menu system, the same design, same user interface. All of that is the same between these two watches. Both also have the same navigation features with breadcrumb mapping and navigation. That means there's no built-in base map or topo map built into these watches, but you can use them with turn-by-turn directions if you create a course in Garmin Connect and sync it over to your watch, which is pretty powerful. Both of these watches also collect the same wellness data with step counting, stairs climbed, body battery, your sleep tracking, and the new HRV status function is on both of these watches. And of course, both of these watches do have the same excellent integration with Garmin Connect, which is the cloud, the platform where both watches will sync your wellness data, your sleep tracking, your activities, and everything like that. It's the same between both of these. All right, now it's time to take a closer look at the hardware of the Instinct Crossover. And as you can see here, when I hold up the Instinct 2 on the right side of the screen and the Instinct Crossover, they look very similar. Both of these watches are a 45mm form factor in diameter, and they're a little bit different in thickness. The Instinct Crossover comes in at 16mm thick, whereas the original Instinct 2 is a little bit thinner at 14mm thick. And that thickness difference, I think, is due to the hands within the Instinct Crossover because they do add a little bit of thickness. Another difference between the Instinct Crossover and Instinct 2 is going to be the weight. The Instinct Crossover comes in at 65 grams, where the Instinct 2 is a little bit lighter at 52 grams. Not a huge difference, probably not something you'll notice, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Other than that though, these two watches are basically identical in terms of build quality. They're both mainly made out of plastic. They both have this kind of contoured band that wraps around your wrist nicely. It is replaceable, by the way, and they both do have the same optical heart rate sensor on the back of the watch, which is Garmin's newer Elevate 4.0 heart rate sensor. If I can show that to the camera properly, that's what it looks like there, and it's the exact same heart rate sensor. When it comes to the display on the Instinct Crossover versus the Instinct 2, there's a pretty big difference. On the Instinct 2, they had this like little window in the corner here. You can see there's a little circle, and in my case I have the date in there, but you can actually customize that little window to show various bits of information within your activities or as a smartwatch. On the Instinct Crossover, they've actually eliminated that little window And they've actually made the entirety of the screen just one single segment, so you can choose what information you want to have in there. You're not kind of shoehorned into using the little window as you did on the Instinct 2, which I personally like. The little window on the Instinct 2 was kind of interesting when it first launched, but it kind of got old after that, and I much prefer just having a larger single display on the Instinct Crossover, even though the displays are basically the same size at around 1 inch. Keep in mind, these displays are very low power, so they're monochrome, there's no colors, they're pretty low resolution, and they're pretty small. So comparing this to something like an Apple Watch or something is not fair at all, because this is designed to conserve power, and you'll understand that when we get to the battery life segment of this video. Even though these displays are pretty dull and muted and not really vibrant or anything like that, they are very usable, especially out in direct sunlight. Pretty easy to see. I have zero issues going for a run, running in the dark, anything like that, because both these watches both also do have backlights as well. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to the Instinct Crossover, and that's going to be the mechanical hands on top of the display. Obviously, just like any old watch out there, these hands are used to tell the time of day, but they do a lot more than that. So first off, there is an hour hand and a minute hand on here. And what's interesting about this is the numbers around the perimeter of the watch and the little white segments on the hands are actually glow in the dark. So if you have this watch out in direct sunlight or even under artificial light like I do now, these numbers and tick marks and everything will actually charge up, and when the lights go down, they'll actually glow with that sort of like iridescent green color. Is that the right word I'm using there? This is a pretty cool feature. It does help you tell the time of day in the dark. However, this glow in the dark function only works for a couple of hours before the charge wears off, and you'll have to charge it back up again by putting it back out in direct sunlight or using your phone flashlight or something like that. Now, what's really interesting about the mechanical hands on the Instinct Crossover is that when you cycle through the menu, they actively move out of the way as not to obstruct what you're trying to do. And I'll show you that now. So right now we're at the watch face, which is fully customizable, by the way. And if I scroll down, you can see that the hands actually move to be perfectly horizontal so that it doesn't obstruct the view of all of my widget glances as I cycle through the menu. So you can see up top here, I have my solar intensity widget. I can go down, I can see my weather. And if I click into something like the weather, you can see that the hands are still horizontal, but if I go down to the weather forecast, the hands will actually go vertical so I can see the columns of the weather forecast hour by hour. And as sort of a gadget geek, I find this to be really fascinating as I cycle through the menu. So you move down and the hands move to the right, you move back up and they move around. And there's a lot of movement of the hands, which makes cycling through the menus kind of entertaining and fun. Another interesting use case of the hands on the Instinct Crossover is that Garmin actually uses these hands as sort of a gauge in certain widgets. So if I dive into my step count here, you can see that the hands actively move into a position to represent where I am in terms of my steps in relation to my step goal. So if I was higher on my step goal, the hands would swing all the way to the other side of the gauge to show that I've only almost completed my goal for the day, which is pretty cool. And another fun use case of these hands is that you can actually use these to see what heart rate zone you're in during an activity, which is kind of cool. It makes it a little bit easier to see at a glance, and it's cool to see a little bit more functionality by using these hands on the Instinct Crossover. When it comes to the design and aesthetics of the Instinct Crossover, there's really something about this watch, and I can't really put my finger on it. But if you compare the Instinct 2 on the left side of your screen to the Instinct Crossover, you can see that there's kind of a 3D effect on the Instinct Crossover, and that's thanks to the hands, the mechanical hands underneath the glass. So on the Instinct 2, the glass surface is pretty close to the display, where on the Instinct Crossover, the glass surface is pretty far from the display, and that creates this sort of like diorama 3D looking effect, where when you move the watch around, there's some shadows that come off the bezel, there's shadows that come off the hand, and it makes for a really interesting looking watch. I think it looks a lot cooler, a lot more interesting than the Instinct 2, and it even looks more interesting than something like the Garmin Fenix 7X I have here. Of course, the Fenix 7X has a brighter full color display and a lot more features and things like that, but side by side, I'd say the mechanical nature of the Instinct Crossover has a little bit of an advantage in terms of looks, and maybe that's just me, but I find it to look pretty interesting. Okay, so far in this video, we've been talking about looks and feel and aesthetics and things like that, things that may not necessarily matter to you as a buyer, and maybe you're thinking, why don't I just save some money and get the Instinct 2? Well, let's talk about GPS accuracy. So On the Garmin Instinct Crossover, Garmin has updated the chipset to be very similar to something like the Garmin Fenix 7X, which has a multi-band, dual-frequency, all-systems chipset, which is kind of the gold standard in terms of GPS accuracy in wearable technology. Now, even though the Garmin Instinct Crossover and the Garmin Fenix 7X have a very similar chipset, there's one major difference, and it's that the Garmin Instinct Crossover does not have multi-band mode, while the Fenix 7X and a lot of other Garmin watches do have multi-band mode, which is strange because they're using a very similar chipset. You would think it's just a software limitation, and maybe it is, I don't really know, but that is what it is. Even though there is no multi-band GNSS on the Instinct Crossover, I've been getting really good accuracy in terms of GPS from this watch. I've taken this watch out on a bunch of different runs, and I've compared it to my Garmin Forerunner 955, the Instinct 2, the COROS Pace 2, some other watches, the Apple Watch, and in most cases, I'm getting really good results from the Instinct Crossover, right up there with multi-band mode on the Garmin Fenix 7X or on the 955. Honestly, all the tracks these days are looking pretty good from these newer Garmin watches with this new chipset, and it's no exception here. So yeah, it's kind of a bummer they didn't add multi-band GPS mode to the Instinct Crossover, but honestly, in most cases, I don't think it's going to be a big deal for most users, unless you're somebody who finds himself in a slot canyon or up next to a cliff face or something like that. In those niche situations, you might find value in a multi-band GPS watch. Now that we've talked about GPS accuracy, let's dive right into battery life on the Instinct Crossover, because this is pretty interesting. You would think a newer, more expensive watch would have better battery life than the older Instinct 2. However, that is not the case. Because the Instinct Crossover has mechanical hands, which have a little motor back there to move them, and the fact that it has that newer GPS chip, which is more accurate, it does take a little bit of a hit in battery life. However, it's still pretty good. So in smartwatch mode, in everyday life, when you're not out on a run or a ride or using GPS or anything like that, you can get up to 28 days of battery life on the Instinct Crossover, which is exactly the same as the Instinct 2, so they're the same there. However, if you opt for the solar model of either one of these watches and you get enough sunlight every day, that's where there's a difference. The Instinct 2 has unlimited battery life with the solar model. As long as you get enough sunlight every day, it'll never have to be charged, which is pretty cool. Whereas the Instinct Crossover will get up to around 70 days with solar model and enough sunlight. So not unlimited, but 70 days is a pretty long time. Another big difference in terms of battery life is going to be GPS on battery life when you're in a run or a ride activity or something like that. That's where the Instinct 2 will get up to about 30 hours with the non-solar model, and the Instinct Crossover will get up to about 25 hours with the non-solar model. So about a 5-hour difference in a GPS activity, which is kind of a bummer, but 25 hours should be more than enough for most people. And again, if you opt for the solar model, there is a difference in GPS mode where the Instinct 2 will get up to about 48 hours with a bit of sunlight, and the Instinct Crossover will go up to about 31 hours with a bit of sunlight. So pretty big difference there. Is that gonna make or break your decision? Let me know in the comments down below. At the end of the day, specs aside, where these watches really shine when it comes to battery life is that everyday smartwatch mode. You can wear these things for weeks on end and not have to charge them, and I really appreciate that. Okay, now that we've talked about all the new features on the Garmin Instinct Crossover, it's time for final thoughts. And here I wanna talk about what I think could be better about this watch, and also why I kind of love it. So let me start this by talking about why I kind of love this watch. I don't really know how to portray this in words, but it's sort of the feel, the look, the nostalgia I get when I wear this watch. It definitely has a more classy look to it. I like having this thing on my wrist. It's different than a lot of other Garmin watches. It doesn't have this like sterile kind of sport watch appearance to it, and that's namely because of the watch hands. They make it look really different, and I really like that. And like I said before, the hand integration into the menu system, the way they move around, the way it all just kind of seamlessly works together, it just makes this watch really fun to use, and I just really enjoy having it on my wrist. This is very subjective, this is really just my opinion, but this watch is a ton of fun to wear, and I never really thought I'd say a sport watch is fun, but This one kind of is. Now, even though this watch is fun and different and I like the way it looks on my wrist, I don't know if that's worth spending $600 on, because that is a pretty expensive watch. At the end of the day, this is an expensive watch, and if you opt for the solar model, you're looking at around $550, and you're entering the same price category as something like the Garmin Forerunner 955. And the Garmin Forerunner 955 has way more features than the Instinct Crossover. This Garmin Forerunner 955 costs $499, which is $50 cheaper than this Garmin Instinct Crossover Solar. And on this watch, I get music storage with offline playback from Spotify and iHeartRadio and Amazon Music. I've also got multi-band GPS. I get the full mapping experience with topo maps and navigation and turn-by-turn directions. I even get training readiness, that new widget that came out on some Garmin's a while ago, and I get a bigger, brighter, full color display that is much more usable than the display on the Instinct Crossover. With all that said though, there is something different about the Instinct Crossover. The look, the feel, the mechanical hands, the monochrome display, it's all got this nostalgic vibe that's hard to ignore, and it's something I really like. And honestly, I think because of that cool factor of the Instinct Crossover, it's going to appeal to those who appreciate real mechanical timepieces, and it might even convert some Casio G-Shock users who are looking for a more capable fitness or sport watch experience, because this watch is a far more capable sport watch compared to most of the G-Shock options out there. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I'm just some guy on YouTube talking about GPS watches, and that's what I think about the Instinct Crossover so far. And now I want to hear from you. Are you interested in the Garmin Instinct Crossover, or are you just going to save some money and go for the Instinct 2, or are you going to get something like the Garmin Fenix 7 or a G-Shock or anything? Let me know in the comments down below what you think about this new watch and if you're gonna get one. Okay, we've made it to the end of this video. I can't believe it. And if you're still watching, you probably enjoyed this video. So you might as well go down and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because those two things really help me out. And I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Help me get there. Also, if you're planning on picking up the new Garmin Instinct Crossover or the Garmin Instinct 2 or the Fenix 7 or the 955 or any watch I've shown off on this channel, check out the links in the description down below, because those do help support this channel and they cost nothing extra to you. So you might as well use them. And with that, I think we're done here. I hope we're done. Did I miss anything? I probably missed something. Okay, I gotta go. I'll see you next time. Bye.